You are tuned in to the Weekend Review, presented by the Prosper Group, where the right turns to win online.
Join us each week as we take a look at what is happening in digital advocacy and politics with a right of center focus. All right, we're back. Welcome to a special episode of the Week in Review podcast. In lieu of our normal show, Caroline and I are bringing you the full interview with Katy Abram this week. We'll be back next week, so please keep listening. Caroline, before we go to Katy, last week you shared a digital action item that was really great about getting some email signups on your list. What do we have for our listeners to do in digital this coming week?
Yeah, so this coming week, we want to identify online advocates. Now, these are going to be folks who are social supporters who will advocate for your online campaign. These are people you want to draw in who are typically savvy with social media, and they can help advocate your campaign online, defend your messaging, share and like your campaign posts with friends and family. You really want to get these supporters to have your back, advocate for you. And this can be like 10 or 15 volunteers who are just willing to spread your message. If you have something coming up that you want to politicize, they can be those people who are there for you. So identify those people, make sure they got your back, and get involved with them. Last week, we shared a sample of our discussion with Prosper Group's Senior Account Manager, Katy Abram. We discussed the relationship between in-house digital and your campaign digital firm. Here's the full interview with Katy, where we talk digital. Today, we have a special guest on the Weekend Review podcast. We had a recent PG blog post on what does a digital director do? Our guest today helped us answer the question about digital directors with her expertise in digital advocacy. We are so excited to have her on the podcast. So please welcome Senior Account Manager at the Prosper Group, Katy Abrams.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Before we get started, I always like to ask our guests how they got their start in campaigns and politics. Can you tell us a little bit about your political origin story and how did you get your start?
Yeah, sure. I actually hated politics. I was once a Democrat and when I was younger. And then in 2009, Obamacare was coming down the pipeline and my kids were really young and I started paying attention and got engaged. I went to a town hall with my senator at the time, Arlen Specter. So that was kind of like my beginning in, actually being engaged. Well, I then started a Tea Party group and one of the people in my group, she had reached out to me and was like, hey, this organization reached out to me and they're wondering if like one of us would run a phone bank. And I had never done it. And she's like, would you be interested? And I'm like, okay. And so I ran my first phone bank and then actually got a job out of it because we did well. A part-time job with Americans for Prosperity and was there for 10 years. And basically my digital part, I was really into like Facebook because Facebook was pretty new at the time. And then Twitter was coming along and I just gravitated towards that and really focused on like grassroots organizing online. And then I ended up here.
Great.
Wow, I did not know that. That's awesome. So Katy, can you start just explaining the role of a digital director in your own words?
Yeah, sure. So when we have new clients come on, sometimes with the bigger clients, typically they will have somebody that is digitally focused. So possibly a digital director. And normally what happens is a digital director is more of the person that's like on the ground and they are there for all the events. They're tight with everybody on the campaign and they're the ones essentially that are taking care of that, instant content that needs to go out. So for example, if a candidate is at a event, they could live stream it, they could tweet it out, that kind of thing. And also as part of that, to engage with the people who are consuming that content. So it's a great opportunity for a digital director to also incorporate the grassroots organizing for the campaign to get volunteers. Also, as part of that, trying to get people to actually go out and vote, part of GOTV. So there's a lot of like more intimate facets that the digital director would be responsible for, as opposed to, you know, somebody within a digital agency like the Prosper Group. What will happen is the digital director typically would work with the digital agency and work in tandem together so that they have a cohesive relationship, and the digital director is leveraging the agency to do what they do best. So what is it that, you know, a digital agency would do best? You know, can we post tweets? Yes, we can do that. Can we post Facebook posts? Yes, we can do that. But are you paying a vendor to do that kind of things? Sometimes that is the case. More times than not, what a digital director is looking for out of an agency is somebody who has the expertise and knowledge in GOTV, in fundraising typically is a huge one, because that's very specific. There are people that are really, really good at fundraising and people that are not. With lists and data, your digital agency is really the place that you're going to want to leverage as a digital director.
Thanks, Katy. You've worked on some big campaigns with digital creating substantial impact. In your experience, what makes for a great digital director?
Yeah, I would say that a great digital director is somebody who is knowledgeable of what's going on in the campaign, knows how to push that information out, knows messaging as to what they should be saying to push out, somebody that really has autonomy. Sometimes what some campaigns will do is they'll have a communications manager as well. So hopefully, if that's the case, they work, you know, arm in arm together. But the digital director really needs to have autonomy and trust from the campaign to be able to deliver whatever that message is. I think another thing that makes a digital director great is somebody that's able to communicate well internally, and set whatever their expectations are. So if they want the agency to do X, Y, and Z, that is what the agency should be doing. But also the agency needs to do that in back to them, right? So having a very strong relationship between the two, I think, is extremely important. So the director is making sure that no efforts are duplicated, and that the campaign is seen in the best light as possible between both entities.
What do you think the right balance is between in-house digital and then the outsourced digital company? How do you strike that balance?
Ultimately, it comes down to communication and trust. You need to tell your vendor like what you need, and your vendor definitely should do the same. I think the digital director, sometimes digital directors haven't done a lot in digital. That's not to be a slight on anybody, but sometimes they're not as immersed in it as, you know, possibly a digital vendor would be. So I would suggest for any digital director, try and learn as much as you possibly can from your vendor. They're a wealth of knowledge. I mean, even being an account manager myself, working on huge campaigns, I am always learning something new. And things are rapidly changing day by day, week by week. So from one cycle to the next, things are totally different. Like this past election cycle, you know, we saw for campaigns that Facebook and Google weren't running any ads right after the election. So we had to come up with, you know, okay, how are we going to manage all the things that are happening right now? You know, we had the issues that happened at the Capitol, and, you know, we wanted to be able to fundraise and how we navigated all of that. So those are really prime opportunities actually to be able to learn some things from the vendor. Now, when it comes to just, you know, being more balanced, again, I go back to like setting expectations, and you know, you should set up whatever boundaries you need, but then also try and learn things aside, try and learn other things from your vendor, because like if you have a website and you need to put up press releases, for example, sometimes, you may reach out to your vendor and that person may be in a meeting and they can't get it up like right away. So ask your vendor, hey, can I learn how to, post news releases on our website? What else can I learn so that I have autonomy as a digital director and I can move on the fly if you are not available, or if it's 12 o'clock at night and they're on the other coast, there are those situations. So I think those kinds of things are super helpful to have that balance. And then when, your vendor is around, then they'll be able to pick up that slack as well. But ultimately, like, every dollar you spend on a retainer is like super precious and should be used more towards that higher level digital work, as opposed to, posting a tweet, unless that's part of your, what the contract is with your vendor and the expectations.
My experience is everyone who's worked with or on campaigns, they all have stories, memorable things. Can you tell us a little bit about your most memorable digital project or campaign that stands out to you?
Yeah, it actually has been quite some time. It was back in 2014. This is when I wasn't necessarily working for a digital firm. I was working more for a grassroots organization, and there were specific races across the country that we were targeting. And one of those races was in North Carolina. Kay Hagan was the US Senator at the time, and there was a possibility we could flip that seat. And I think Tom Tillis was the Republican candidate. But our efforts were going negative towards Kay Hagan. One of the things that was happening at that time on digital is that, like, Twitter was just on fire, and the grassroots were actually very much involved on Twitter, which that has changed significantly since then. So what we were looking at that time was Organizing for America was a really big grassroots. They were like the counter to ours. They were the yin to our yang, basically. And one of the goals that we had set for ourselves was actually getting more followers than them on our organization's North Carolina Twitter account, which sounds very weird. Like, why would you want to do that? But we were specifically looking for people in North Carolina and, voters, influencers, that kind of thing, to not only just follow us, but to echo all the stuff that we were pushing out there. Ultimately, the night of the election, I was sitting there and, like, they were calling race after race, and, seats are flipping, and they finally get to North Carolina, and by the hair of his nose, Tom Tillis won. I was screaming, like, I was so excited, because it was really the first, like, big, election that I had been a part of. And what happened afterwards, which I was so excited, it was like the first feather in my cap. There was actually an article in a huge publication. I can't remember what it was. I think it was like Wall Street Journal or The Hill. And they had attributed some of what happened, like him winning, due to Twitter, because we actually had, like, surpassed OFA, like, significantly, and just had this huge following and people listening and people pushing out the messaging. So that was actually pretty cool, because you would think Twitter, what can you do on Twitter that's really substantial? At that time, that's what happened, and it was really, really exciting.
That's a great story. I love that. Well, Katy, thank you for sharing your digital expertise with our podcast listeners. I hope you join us again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
You can find our Prosper Group Week in Review podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
If you like the show, please subscribe and share.